Hi everybody, and welcome back to Kardec Radio for Teens. For those of you who might not know, Kardec Radio for Teens is a place where teens can come together with other teens to learn about Spiritist teachings and topics in a way that makes more sense to us and is more relatable to us as teenagers in today's society. For over 2 years now, we've been reading through the Spirits book together every week for a half hour, going through the questions and answers and trying to get a better understanding of them so that we can further our knowledge of Spiritism based off this primary knowledge that we're getting from this book. In the beginning of the book, we talked a lot about more like materialistic and physical components that we were talking about of Spiritism. Then we started talking about a lot of different topics that affect us, and now last week we talked about earthly joys and sorrows. So those joys and sorrows that we have in this corporeal life, on this, right now, like on earth, the joys and sorrows that we have, and our future joys and sorrows. That's what's going to happen after this one corporeal life. So we're going to start this week in Future Joys and Sorrows, talking about the section, Intervention of God in Rewards and Atonements. So how God comes in and plays a role in our rewards and our atonements, are things that we have to make up for the mistakes that we've made. So let's get right to it. Question 963. Is God personally concerned with each person? Is God not too great, and are we not too small for each individual to be of any importance to the Creator? So here the question is saying, how can God possibly care about each and every one of us? Because He is so great, so powerful, so big, and we're so small. So how can that be possible? How can God care for each and every one of us? And of course, just remember that we use the term He just because that's the way our society has kind of developed to talk about God, but we know that God does not have either gender. And then the Spirits answered, God is concerned with all of creation, no matter how small it may be. Nothing is too small or insignificant for God's goodness. So God is concerned with all creation, so the humans, even the little ants, all creations, no matter how small we might be. No matter how many humans there might be, no matter how many spirits there might be, we all are significant. We all have our importance. Question 964. Is God concerned with each of our actions to reward or punish us? Aren't most of such actions insignificant to God? So here they're asking, is God paying attention and keeping track of all of our actions? So what deserves a reward or what deserves a punishment? So what we did that was good and what we did that was bad or not right? So is God keeping track of all of these things? And aren't such things so small? Because sometimes you do something that's so small. How come God is concerning over this one little small thing that you did? And the Spirits answered, God's laws apply to all your actions, and if you violate them, it is your fault. When a person violates one of those laws, God does not say, You have been gluttonous, I will punish you for it. However, God has set a limit. Diseases and even death are the consequence of overstepping that limit. Any time you are disciplined, it is a result of violating a law. Everything happens that way. So it's not that God is going to sit there and say, oh, you have to do this now and you have to do this and look at everything and clearly say, oh, you did this thing wrong, you're going to be punished. But everything that you do wrong, you're going against God's laws. So there's going to be a natural reaction, a natural atonement that you're going to have to go through to fix that. You're going to have to fix that mistake because there's going to be that natural punishment that comes from violating God's laws. And of course it says here that God has set a limit. So there's some things that if you keep overstepping these things too much, there's going to be much worse consequences than just oh, you have to fix that mistake. You might have some sort of disease or have a really big problem that affects you because of these things. So there are limits that you can't pass, but for little things there's just natural reactions, natural punishments that are going to happen. And of course when we think of punishment, we think of something so harsh, but we know that these are so that we can better ourselves, so that we can learn from our mistakes and grow from them. So anytime you're going through something that's a little challenging, it means that if you're being disciplined, like they said, anytime you're disciplined, it's a result of violating a law. So all these things that are happening, it's because you did a mistake that now you have to fix. Now you have to make up for that. And they said everything happens that way. So no matter little or big, there's going to be that punishment that happens. And then Allan Kardec puts his own comment in, and he says, all our actions are subject to God's laws. Any wrongdoing on our part, no matter how inconsequential it may seem to us, is a violation of those laws. When we experience the consequences of such violations, we can only blame ourselves, as we are the sole architects of our happiness or misery, as it is shown in the following narrative. So, before we get into that little story that they put in, they're saying that all of our actions are subject to God's laws. So there's nothing that's going to slide or go under the radar. Everything, little or big, that happens, it's under God's laws. It's going to go against or for God's laws. So no matter how small that might seem, maybe you stole a pencil from someone else, that will have its consequence, that you will have to make up for that mistake. And here we have to keep in mind this important thing that they put at the end, that we're the ones who control our happiness and our misery, our sadness. Because it depends on what we do if we're going to be happy or we're going to have to go through all these punishments and be miserable. So if we just do things right or we work to fix our mistakes, then we won't have to go through this misery. So we're the ones that control our happiness and sadness. So we have no one else to blame for these things happening to us except for ourselves, whether in this life or in previous lives. So then Allan Kardec continues to this narrative. A father has educated and instructed his child on how to guide himself in life. He hands over a piece of land to him to farm and says, I have given you the practical directions and all the necessary tools for making this land productive and earning a living. I have given you all the instructions needed for understanding those directions. If you follow them, your land will yield abundant harvest and you will be able to rest in your old age. If you do not, it will bear nothing and you will die of hunger. Having said this, he leaves him to his own devices. So we get this simple story, and we can compare it to us and to God. So God is giving us all the necessary tools we need. We have everything. We have the instructions, we have the tools, the directions, everything. But it's just about how we're going to use it. Are we going to look at those directions? Are we going to follow those instructions? Or are we going to go our own path? Because then we're not going to make it, like they said here. So in such a simple example, we see that we're given all the necessary things, but it's what we do with it. That's why we're the ones that control our happiness and our misery, because it's what we do with it. We have all this stuff around us. We have all these opportunities, all these chances, all instructions, directions, the tools. But a lot of times we don't act on that. We don't do anything with the stuff that we have. So it's important to keep in mind that with us controlling our happiness and our misery, look around us and see what we have and see what we can do with that stuff that we have for the positive. And then Allan Kardec continues. It is not true that the land yields crops corresponds to the skill and care invested in its cultivation, and that any mistake or negligence on the part of the son has a harmful effect on the harvest. Therefore, the son will be comfortable or poor in his old age, depending on whether he has followed or neglected his father's directions. So, it's true that if we, like they're saying, this isn't a far-fetched example, because if you don't take proper care of the land, of the crops, and do the proper things, then nothing is going to grow. Or if you follow the instructions and grow it properly, then it's going to grow great, and you'll be well off in the future. So this is like a true example they're saying here. It's not far-fetched. And so it depends on how we follow the directions, because the directions are there, but it depends on what we do with it. And then he continues, God is even more far-sighted. We are told at every moment whether we are doing right or wrong through the spirits that are sent to guide us, although we do not always listen to them. There is also the difference that, if the son wasted his time, he has no opportunity to repair his lapses, while God would have always given him the means of correcting his mistake through new lives. So, with God, it's even more direct. We're given directions and instructions all the time, but a lot of times we don't listen to them. So even sometimes you have that voice in your head saying, oh, don't do this, but you do it anyway, and then you have to face the consequences. But if we listen to that voice more, it'll prevent us from doing a lot of things, because we have the directions, the instructions, all the tools within us, and given to us, inspired by us, by the spirits, but we need to make sure we listen to it and we pay attention and not avoid them. And also here, it's lucky for us is that in this situation that they were saying that the son, he's not gonna, once he doesn't harvest the land and it bears nothing, he's gonna die and that's it. That was his last chance. But with God, we're always given more chances. So although we want to get it done on the first chance, that's okay if we don't, because we're gonna do it on the next one. And we'll be given another chance to correct it. But it doesn't mean we should just stay forever in that thing, because we want to move on, we want to evolve, or else we're just going to be stuck in that miserable situation forever and ever. But in case we do mess up a little again, we can always try another time. And now we're on to the next section, which is nature of future joys and sorrows. So we're talking about future joys and sorrows. Question 965. Do the joys and sorrows of the soul after death have any material aspect? So after we leave this corporeal body and we're just in the spirit world, do you have any material aspects to joys and sorrows? Because a lot of times, like on earth, we have money and this and that are material objects, but what about in the spirit world? And the spirits answered, common sense tells you that they cannot be of material nature, because the soul is not matter. There is nothing carnal in those joys and sorrows, yet there are 1,000 times more vivid than those you experience on earth, because the spirit, when freed from matter, is more sensitive. Matter stifles feeling and sensations. So they're saying, okay, clearly if the spirit isn't made out of matter, then their joys and sorrows aren't going to be material things. But just because they're not material things, so you think, oh, they're not rich, they don't have the latest iPhone, so what are they happy about? What are they sad about? But it's, like they said here, it's 1,000 times more vivid, because your emotions are heightened, because you don't have this material holding you back, this matter like dragging you down a little bit. So the joys and sorrows that we face in the spirit world are going to be much more intense and than they are on earth or on the corporeal world. Question 966. Why do people often form unrefined and absurd ideas of the joys and sorrows of the future life? So how come people have these crazy thoughts that, like, oh, in heaven there's going to be all these things, I'm going to have all this stuff, or if it's a bad place, like some people like hell, think hell, then it's going to be all these horrible things. So why do we find these absurd ideas of joys and sorrows? Like, what are you going to be happy about? And the spirits answered, because their intelligence is still imperfectly developed. Does a child understand things to the same capacity as an adult? Besides, their idea of the future life is often a result of the education to which they have been subjected, an education that urgently needs to be reformed. So it's just because those people are less advanced. They haven't learned as much. Think about a child compared to an adult, or even us, a teenager compared to a child. We already know more things than that child understands. And then think about the adult. And now think about when we have lots of different steps of evolvement. Spirits have different evolvement. There's people who are not that developed yet, and they can't think past, like, oh, in heaven there's going to be chocolate cake all the time, right? Some people can't think past that. So those people just have to be further educated and learn more to know that, okay, that doesn't really make sense. That's not what it's going to be like. And then the spirits continue. Your language is too incomplete to express what transcends your present existence. So we have to communicate with you using comparisons borrowed from that existence. As a result, you have mistaken images and figures for reality. As humanity becomes enlightened, its thought understands much that its language is unable to express. So here what they're saying is that also we don't have the expressions to describe a lot of things that do happen in the spirit world, or in the joys and sorrows and the feelings. We don't have words for that, because we have words for things that we experience. So it's hard for the spirits and higher order spirits to communicate their ideas and things to us, because we don't have the same words. We won't understand words that they're using, because they're not things that we experience. So as humanity continues to enlighten, we'll be able to understand more of these terms, and then it'll have a clearer transition, and we'll have a clearer image of what it would be like. But they said that because they try and put it into simple terms for us, a lot of people mistake that, and they think of it the wrong way. Like, they take a story and they put it literally. But we know that they're just putting it down to simpler terms for us, and that's not exactly what they meant. Question 967. What does the happiness of good spirits consist of? So, what do good spirits, like, what do they feel happy about? What does that consist of? And the spirits answered, in knowing all things, feeling neither hatred, jealousy, envy, ambition, or any of the passions that make human beings miserable. Their mutual love is a source of supreme happiness. They have none of the wants or anxieties of material life, and are happy in the good they do, because the happiness of spirits is always proportionate to their degree of elevation. Only perfectly pure spirits enjoy the highest happiness. However, others are happy on different levels. Between the bad and perfect spirits, there is an infinite range of elevation and happiness, as the joy of each spirit is always proportionate to its moral state. Those who have already achieved a certain degree of advancement have a perception of the happiness of those who are further along. They seek higher happiness, but as an object of emulation rather than jealousy. They know that it is solely up to them to reach it, and they work to that end with the tranquility of a good consciousness. They are happy in not having to suffer with inferior spirits what inferior spirits endure. So, good spirits, they're happy about knowing a lot of things and doing the good and not having to feel hatred or jealousy or envy or any of those things that make us miserable. They don't have those, and they're happy about that. They're happy that they aren't feeling those things, and they all are at a mutual love and a mutual state of happiness. So they don't have those wants or anxieties that we have. So that makes them happier, that makes them lighter, right? And also we know that there's a wide range of spirits at different states of evolution, that some are more evolved than others. So there's different states of this happiness that they're feeling, this goodness that's within us. But when the good spirits are looking up to someone that has more happiness, that's better than them, they're not looking at their like, oh, I'm so jealous of that person. They're looking as, I'm inspired to get to that state too. So then they work hard and do good things and get to that state. So it's a lot of happiness, and it gets rid of those negative feelings that we have on earth, or more imperfect spirits have. And that's important to keep in mind, because we know that it's us who's gonna be in control of our happiness and our sadness. So we're the ones who have to do good things so that we can be happy. So there's no point to just sit around and look at what other people have and be sad about what we don't have, but we have to act on it and do things so that we can get to that state, instead of just complaining or being jealous, and we just have to work to be our best selves. Question 968. You stated that an absence of material wants is one of the conditions of happiness for spirits. Is it not the satisfaction of these wants a source of joy for people? So they're saying is that the spirits, they don't have these material things, which is happiness. When they're happy, they don't have any material things. So they're saying, but on earth, people with material things, people are happy when they get a material thing. So they're saying, how is this compared? So people, like, their happiness is a material thing, but for spirits, their happiness is no material things. And the spirits answered, yes, it's an animal pleasure. When people cannot satisfy those wants, they are tortured by them. So this is more of a animalistic and materialistic pleasure that we have. A materialistic want is to want these material things and be happy with material things, because we know those things aren't going to last in the long run. So they're not the things that should be focused on. And then it's a bad cycle, because then when people don't have the material things that they want, then they're tortured and they feel horrible. They feel jealousy and hatred and all those things that we felt before, that we don't want to feel those things, those negative things. So that's why, yeah, sure, the materialistic things may seem important to us now, but that's not what's important in the long run. That's not what we should focus on. Question 969. What does it mean when people say that pure spirits are united in God's hearts in active devotion? So that's quite simple. It says pure spirits are united in God's heart in active devotion. And the spirits answered, this statement is an allegorical representation of the knowledge they possess with regards to God's perfections. They see and understand God. However, you must not interpret this metaphor any more literally than other statements of a simple nature. Everything in nature, from the grain of sand up, is devoted, meaning proclaims God's power, wisdom, and goodness. You must not assume that high spirits are absorbed in eternal contemplation, which would be an unwise and monotonous happiness, and furthermore a selfish one, because their existence would be of perpetual uselessness. They no longer undergo the tribulations of corporeal life, an exemption that is a joy in itself. As we said, they know everything. They make use of the intelligence they have acquired in helping the progress of other spirits. They find great joy in this occupation. So here what it's saying is, don't take that saying too literally, but those who are pure spirits, who are at that state of perfection, they see and understand God. So they're at that state, and they don't just, once they get to the state, they don't just say, okay, I reached perfection, I'm just going to sit around and do nothing. No, they're going to work hard and use all their knowledge to help other spirits get to that state as well, to help other spirits evolve as well. And they find joy in it. They find joy in helping other people progress with what they've learned. Question 970. What does the suffering of inferior spirits consist of? The spirits answered, their suffering is as varied as the causes by which they are produced, and correspond to the inferiority of each spirit, as the joys of higher spirits are proportionate to their superiority. Their suffering may be summed up as followed: envying the superiority that makes other spirits happy, and their inability to obtain it; feeling regret, jealousy, rage, and despair in regards to what prevents them from being happy, and being tormented by remorse and indescribable moral anguish. They long for all sorts of joys and are tortured by their inability to satisfy their cravings. So, as we've talked about many times, every person is different and every case is different. So each suffering is going to be on a case-by-case basis of what happened, of what was the cause of that suffering. So each suffering is also going to correspond to the variety of causes that it could be. But then they said, to sum up, a lot of things that inferior spirits suffer about is envying the superiority. So looking at people who have more than us or know more than us and being envious, being jealous of that. And also just feeling all those negative emotions that we talked about: regret, jealousy, rage, despair, and all those negative things boiling up inside of us causes us to suffer. And feeling those things prevent us from being happy. And then again, tormented by remorse. So many things that we know are bad things to have, but we continue to do them anyways. Those are things that we suffer from, that because we know that we're not perfect and we're some of these inferior spirits that are going through these suffering things. So we know the problem, so we need to work on bettering ourselves and putting ourselves above those and trying not to feel as much regret or jealousy or rage, despair, and all those other things, hatred, that we know that are going to prevent us from being happy. Question 971. Is the influence exercised by spirits over one another always good? So we always have spirits that are influencing us and guiding us, like we said, like that thought that comes to our mind, like, oh, don't do this, or, oh, go that way instead. So little things that we have influencing us. So they're saying, is it always a good one, though? Is that always a good spirit that's influencing us, that's helping us, that's giving us that inspiration? And the spirits answered, it is always good on the part of good spirits, but preserved spirits try to lead astray those whom they believe to be susceptible to being misled from the path of repentance and amendment, and whom have often led into wrongdoing during earthly life. So when it's good spirits, then yes, it's always these good influences, these good inspirations that we're given. But sometimes there's these spirits that try and lead you astray because they see that they can lead you astray. They see that you would follow their misleading directions, so they try and put you on the wrong path. But those are less of all spirits. So we have to kind of make that judgment for ourselves. If we hear a thought and we think, oh yeah, that makes sense, that's a good thing that we should do. And then there's a second part to this question, and it says, so does death not deliver us from temptation? So here they're saying, so does death not deliver us from temptation? So once you die, are you still going to have that temptation? And they're saying no. But the action of malevolent spirits is much less powerful over other spirits than over incarnated, because they no longer feel material passions. So here they're saying, so no, it does not prevent you from these temptations once death comes. So in the spirit world, there's still these temptations. But the action is less powerful because they don't have this material body, and their spirit's not as strong because they're not as evolved. So they don't have that much power, control, that they can even influence you that much. But again, we have to analyze the situation ourselves and see what is the good or wrong thing to do, and follow the good decision. Question 972. How do malevolent spirits tempt other spirits since they do not have passions? So how do they have these temptations over other spirits if they don't have passions? And the spirits answered, passions no longer exist materially. However, they still exist in the thought of low-order spirits, and the wicked ones keep impure thoughts in their victims by taking them to places where they witness the exercise of those passions and whatever else can excite them. So even though in the spirit world these imperfect spirits aren't going to have those material things that they're obsessed about, so even though that, they still think it. They still have that passion for those material things in their consciousness, in their thoughts. So the wicked spirits, they try and guide people to places where they can see their passions, kind of like to see it through someone else, since they can't have that for themselves. So that's where we'll leave off today, and next week we'll continue talking about these joys and sorrows that happen, that we feel in the future after this corporeal life. But before we leave off today, I'd like to read our message from the Daily Book of Positive Quotations for today's date, November 6th. This one's titled, Believing. More persons, on the whole, are humbugged by believing in nothing than by believing in too much. Which is better, to believe in something or someone and to suffer disappointment once in a while, or to doubt everything and everyone and never be disappointed? Cynics and pessimists aren't usually happy people. Perhaps their expectations of self-fulfilling, the people, causes, institutions they expect to disappoint them generally do. When we take the risk of believing, and it is a risk, we also find a chance of finding happiness. I am a risk taker. I will let myself believe. If at all you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to email me at kardecradioforteens@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you right away. I'm Bia, and this has been Kardec Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening. This has been Kardec Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.